All right, so welcome to Consumer Math. Today's date is Monday, March 1st. Welcome to March, everyone. March 1st, 2021. Yeah, fixed versus adjustable mortgages. So far, every single lesson for the past 4 lessons and the spreadsheet that we made has all been fixed. What I mean by that is the rate over here, this 4.1% that I randomly chose, you guys chose a random other yearly interest rate. That was an amount that does not change for the entire duration for my 30 years of my mortgage, or your 15 years if you chose that rate or that time. What happens if you don't do that and you do something that's called an adjustable mortgage, a variable rate? This is what happens. Well, let's talk about the different types of loans. So we'll call this types of loans. And I actually want to type instead of write. It's going to be types of loans, types of mortgages, I guess. Mortgages is a more specific term, but it's still a loan. A loan where if you don't pay your loan, then they take your house. So don't do that. By the way, that is called defaulting on your loan, and don't default on your loan because it generally just destroys your credit. It makes it so that you'll never buy a house for the next 10, 15 years. You'll never be able to buy a car for the next 10, 15 years. Bad things happen. Don't default on your loan. If you default on your mortgage, it's also called foreclosing. You can find houses that are foreclosed. That's, again, the bank has repossessed the house and they're trying to sell it to someone else so that they can make some money. So let's talk about so I'm gonna have 3 columns. The first column is gonna be loan. My second column is gonna be interest rate, and my third column is gonna be my APR. So I am judging this information off of NerdWallet as of last night, so 2/28, and hopefully those numbers are still valid. These will change though, like if people are watching this YouTube video in the future, or if you guys are thinking in the future, oh, Mr. Sindel said that 30-year fixed rate is the way to go. That's not always going to be the case. So let's talk about the 30-year fixed first. According to NerdWallet, that currently has an interest rate of 3.062% and an APR of 3.122%. 3.122%. All right, this is the time where everyone in their mind should have the same-ish question. What's an APR again? Isn't that the same thing as interest rate? Why are those two different? Does anyone know the difference before I tell you the difference? No? We only need about 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5-ish columns. So I'm going to skip down here. Let's ask the question that everyone is thinking. Right about down here. What is the difference between interest rate and APR? Because I feel like most adults also don't know this answer. Because generally speaking, they're basically the same thing, except APR is always adding on a little bit extra. So the interest rate is purely just the rate of your mortgage. So what rate is being charged on a yearly for every year. So interest rate is just, I kind of think of this as the base. I'll put that in quotes. This is kind of like the base amount. But things can be added on to that. Like, so now I'm into the region of APR. APR is made up of a bunch of things. I'm just going to talk about, I'll do 3 of them. But you're adding on things. So APR, you're adding on, you're doing plus points. And I think that's a whole lesson. I think I'm going to talk tomorrow about how points work. If you pay more money up front, then your interest rate or your APR will be lower. If you have any extra fees that are associated with that loan, so you have to do plus fees. And there's just a ton of other things. I'm just going to say in general, plus other charges. So usually APRs are always higher than interest rates, but that could be different depending on if you have, forget the opposite of points. There's points if you do one direction, and there's, I think it's called creditor units or There's something, I'll look it up by tonight and I'll teach you tomorrow. But you could have an APR that's lower than your interest rate depending on how your points are associated. But generally speaking, APRs are going to be higher than your interest rate. So and again, this is a broad speaking umbrella saying most 30-year fixed mortgages today in the United States are at 3.062, APRs at 3.122. What about a 15-year? Some of you chose that. And you always want to write this word fixed because that's going to be different than adjustable. For fixed, that's 2.373 and APR of 2.475. 2.475. Let me ask you guys a question before I finish this table. Why? Why is this rate for 15-year fixed lower than the 30-year fixed? Think of this from the bank's perspective or the lending institution. It could be a credit union, it could be a bank, it could be your Uncle Fred if he has a lot of money and he's giving you the money to buy a house. I don't know. Whoever it is, why would it make more sense to charge a lower rate for 15 versus a higher rate for 30? Think of this if this was your money. You are the bank. You're going to give someone $200,000 and that is going to be locked in place. That rate that you decide, whatever rate you decide, is locked in place for either 30 years or 15 years. So you are getting your money back quicker, and that has something to do with interest rate, but I'm not seeing the connection between why this number should be lower or higher than that number. So it has to do with this word called interest rate risk. So whenever you, as the bank or lending institution, decide to give money as a loan, you are taking on risk. Obviously, there's the risk of, will that person actually pay it back? Hopefully they'll pay it back because otherwise you get to steal their home, right? But there's also just the interest rate risk. What happens if the interest rate, the market, goes really high? What happens if the interest rate all of a sudden balloons really high to 5%, 6%? What happens if it gets really low down to 1%? What does that mean for you as a bank? Well, for you as a bank, you want as high as possible. You want to make as much money as possible. What if you lock in this rate for 30 years and after the 10th year, everything is at 5%, 6%? You're losing money because you could have been charging 5%. Because of the fact that these are locked in for a longer amount of time, you want to guarantee that you get a return that's higher than market rate. Market rate right now in the United States is really low because of the pandemic. So that's why this number is so low. When I locked in my house over a year ago, my interest rate, the average for the United States was 4%. In just 1 year, this has gone down a whole percent, which is insane. That's a lot. So that's the general explanation. Because it's 15 years, it's a lower amount of time. There's less time for the market to move up and down. I don't need to have some inflation for my interest rate. I trust it a little bit more. It's a balance between how can I get as low as possible so that people want to come to me as a lending institution, but as high as possible so that I don't lose money. I'll talk about that again and reiterate my point later. Let's talk about the adjustable mortgage. This is called a 5-in-1 ARM. 5/1, capital A, capital R, capital M. It is an acronym. This acronym stands for, I'll put it, I don't know, over here on the left. This acronym stands for adjustable rate mortgage. Adjustable rate mortgage. And what does the 5-in-1 mean? The 5 means, hey, for the first 5 years of everyone's mortgage that locks into the 5-in-1 ARM, the first 5 years, it is locked into place just like the 30-year fixed, just like the 15-year fixed. It's fixed for 5 years. What does the 1 mean? Every 1 year after the 5 years, they readjust your APR, your interest rate, to whatever the market says. And that happens year after year after year after year. So they're changing it quite often. Every single year. That could go up, it could go down. Because, oh yeah, question?
Should we choose a different amount of time to pay back depending on your income?
Yes, you should. And then it really, it's not so much dependent on your income, it's more dependent on the stability of your income, I would say, and your prediction of the market. If you predict that the market's going to go terrible and you know that interest rates are going to go down, and it's going to be good for us, the people that are trying to buy houses, you probably want to be doing something like this, the 5-1 ARM, because if the interest rate is going to be for the next, it's still locked in for a fixed amount of time. It's still like usually a 30-year amount of time that you're paying it back. But if you know interest rates are going to continue to be low for the next 30 years because you just have this inkling, this intuition, then yes, this is the best option by far. But if interest rates go up and up and up, and eventually this is worse, this is like 4%, I could lock in a permanent 3%, but now this is worse. So it's plain, it's basically trading stocks. You're taking on this risk of what is the market doing for, usually it's US Treasury bonds, short-term Treasury bonds. I wanted to say something I totally forgot. Anyway, this is based off of Treasury bonds. Let's say that this down here, this is based on short-term Treasury bonds. Short-term Treasury bonds. And again, Treasury bonds, it's the government. You're saying, hey, government, here's some money. Give me some percent increase of money after a year. And you can choose any amount of time that you want that they have available. Like you could choose a 1-year Treasury bond, a 5-year, a 10-year, a 30-year, I think maybe even exists. I'm not sure about that though. And it's just a very, very secure way of investing your money. Yes, it is less than inflation. So you are losing money due to inflation every single year, but it's secure. It is backed by the federal government. Unless our government collapses, you are going to get that money back at the end of the period. So it's very, very secure, and therefore it has a very low interest rate. By the way, what is the interest rate for a 5-1 ARM? Today it's 2.306, 2.306. And I'll point out, it is continuing to go down. And 2.929, 2.929% for the APR. I'm not exactly sure why that is so much bigger than the 15-year fixed right now, but I'm looking it up. Okay, so I want to do a graph of how these three plans would look. And before I move too fast, does everyone kind of understand the intuition behind Treasury bonds? Treasury bonds, the rate of return, and you guys could invest in Treasury bonds right now if you wanted. You just have to put down the money. This rate does fluctuate. The US Treasury does decide on these rates, and you can actually look them up. Like if I come up here, and I think I already looked them up, right? This is a 1-year Treasury bond, and you can see that, boom, pandemic happened, shot down. So we should see some sort of correlation between the US Treasury bonds and 5-1 ARM, right? So if you look up 5-1 ARM rates, it's the stock market. You're playing with the stock market. It does go up, it does go down. You can see it is slowly going down. You have these things on 5-1 ARMs, any sort of adjustable mortgage rates, usually that they can only go up or down a certain percent per year. Usually it's locked in, like it can't increase or decrease more than 1% per year because that'd be too extreme. But you can see because Treasury bonds have gone down, the 5-1 ARMs have also gone down. How does the 5-1 ARM rates compare historically? By the way, this is the past 5 years to 30-year fixed. Oh, wow. It's basically the same thing. And that's the whole point. You get to choose anywhere on this graph to choose your interest rate. If you lock in right here, boom, you're locked in right there for the rest of those 30 years. Or if you chose right now, boom, you're locked in at that rate for the rest of those 30 years. It's a fixed rate, and you get to choose when to do it. Obviously, it's when you buy your house. You might not have a choice. I have to buy a house. I got what I got. But if you're playing like the stock markets, you're saying, oh, wow, it's gone down a lot, and I think it's going to go back up. I think I should get it now. It is like the stocks. You have to predict the market. All right, so let's go ahead and do an explanation for our graph. When should you buy your house? That's kind of the question here. Let's compare some graphs. So we're going to make a big graph down here. Thank you, really. Okay, so let's make a graph down here. First, you make an X and a Y axis. Are you doing it purely online? I don't know. I wanted people to do paper. If you do that, you are going to, yeah, and take a picture and put it in there. Yeah, sure. Yes.
Would you ever invest, or would you ever buy a Nintendo Switch?
Nintendo Switch, yeah, of course.
Yeah, but,
I have no idea. Probably some sort of Pokemon game for old times' sakes. I would definitely play Super Smash Brothers. All right. On the y-axis here, this is going to be your interest rate. Interest rate percent. So we have 1%, 2%, 3%, 4%, 5%, and I'm not going to go anything above 6%. That would be insane. But I guess it could happen. I don't know. What does this historically go up to? Look, this one maxed out at 5. If I go to 10 years, does it ever go above 5? Max? Oh my God. Look at that. In 1981, it was over 18%. Oh my gosh. Mr. Godoy, what happened in 1981? Please tell us. I have not looked this up in advance. So yeah, if you got a fixed rate back then, you're you're basically paying it off right now, right? 30 years from 2000. Yeah, you already paid it off. Anyway, yeah, so it can go above 6. It can go up to 18. But let's limit our y-axis to just 6. Okay, our x-axis down here, this is just going to be time. It doesn't matter what our units are in. I'm going to make this a very general story to make this as easy as possible. Let's go ahead and say you lock in. You locked in your interest rate a while ago. You're Mr. Sindel. Let's make that easy. You locked in at 4%. Let's go ahead and make a fixed rate at 4%. What does that look like? I'm going to use colors here. This right here, this orange line, this represents fixed at 4%. And that will happen for 30 years, 15 years, doesn't really matter. I guess for me, it's 30 years. How does this compare to something that's like an APR that fluctuates, this adjustable mortgage? Well, first you have to look at your treasury bonds. And again, sometimes it's based off of treasury bonds. I can also add this to it. Sometimes it's also based on, what is it called? The LIBOR or IBOR? I can't remember what it's called. It's LIBOR, LIBOR. You don't need to know what it stands for. I think it's the London Interbank Offered Rate or something like that. But it's just, again, somewhere in Europe that decides what rates everyone should use, and the United States also uses that. They kind of use a mixture of things, but I'm again, oversimplifying. It's based off of something, and that something fluctuates. Let's go ahead and say it's based off of 1-year treasury rates or something short-term. Let's say that treasury rates, I'm going to make an example here that's not quite true to this story of where's the 1-year treasury bond. Something that fluctuates. Let's go ahead and say it starts here at 2% and it fluctuates. Have some sort of general graph that looks like this. I don't know. Something that kind of goes up, goes down. It usually will stay below 4%. Remember me telling you the story of the 2000 housing market crash and why that happened? The whole point was back in the day, treasury bonds were the thing to invest in, but treasury bonds lately have been terrible. And look at this. They are terrible. Look at this rate. This rate is 0.5%. Inflation is generally around 2%, 2 to 3%, right? You are losing 1.5% every year that you invest with treasury bonds. They're not the way to do it. Historically, if you look at the max rate, they used to be really good. Look at this. They're up here, and you can't see it because it's all pixelated. That's 17.5% up here. They used to be amazing to invest in. Even like at this spot right here, you're still well above inflation. They used to be great, and now they're not. So they do fluctuate quite a bit. What happens with a 5-and-1 fixed? So with a 5-and-1 fixed, they lock you in again to this rate, whatever it is, but they also have to add a little bit because they don't just do exactly what the treasury is. They want to guarantee that they're making some money. They'll usually do something like 1% above that. So that's what I'm going to do for mine. I'm going to make this a red function. My red function is constantly going to be 1 above that, but it's locked in for 5 years. So let's go ahead and make a line here. I don't have my my x-axis labeled very well, but it's going to go some arbitrary distance out. Let's call that 5. Actually, do I have 1, 2, 3, 4? I can just come out to the 5 dots. Every dot represents a year. I'll say this is time in years. I can say that's 1, that's 2, that's 3, that's 4, that's 5. So it's locked in for 5 years, but then what happens? Then every 1 year from then, they relock in a new rate. Well, what rate are they going to lock in? And essentially, I look at what the treasury bond is doing. This is the way that you want to be thinking of it when you're thinking about 501 ARMs. If you're looking into houses, look at what the treasury's at. Right now, the treasury bonds at year 5 are right here. You can see that that point is on that green line. Go 1% up. You can see that that's at about 3.3%. So I'm going to add 1. That's about 4.3%. 4.3% is right about there. And now you are locked into that rate for 1 year. So you come back here and you say you're locked into that rate for 1 year. You come out to the right. I'm going to pause because I'm going too fast. Just want to make sure everyone can understand the story. I'll let you finish writing so you can listen. You have decided to go with a 5-in-1 ARM plan. That means the first 5 years, you're locked into whatever rate you're currently at. And in fact, I have that rate right now. If you lock into the 5-in-1 ARM, you're looking at 2.306, a pretty awesome rate, better than Mr. Sandell's 4% that I got locked into. So you're locked into that rate, and in my example, it's 3% for 5 years. So it's locked into that rate, something that's above your short-term treasury bonds, and then it's locked in for 5 years. But then every single year after this, I'm going to have little chunks here that kind of match what's happening with my green line. This green line representing treasury bonds. Maybe I should label this graph a little bit better. Can you label it with me? This green line on mine, this represents treasury. This green line right here is U.S. treasury bonds. Treasury bond returns, I should say, bond rates. This rate fluctuates, and you can obviously see that in the graph that I showed before. So the way that you can generalize this is look at the rate for the current year that you're about to be locked into your new rate at. So at year 5, you look at that rate and you say, okay, that was 3.3%-ish. Go up 1%. That's probably what you're going to be charged in your 501 ARM plan. You're locked into that rate for the next year. That means your next 12 payments, because you're paying on a monthly basis, your next 12 payments are that amount. Notice that you're now paying way more than what's happening for the fixed rate that Mr. Sandell got locked into. You're paying well over 4%. Can you even afford that? Did your job fluctuate? Are you making more money than you did now? Are you making less money? Because if you made less money, you're in trouble. They jump by a whole over 1%. And usually this doesn't happen. They only let you jump by up to 1%. Okay, what happens after that year? Look at what's happening with our U.S. Treasury. It still went up. Now our U.S. Treasury bond is right here at a height of about, I don't know, 3.8-ish. So that means my new rate for that next year is going to be 4.8-ish. It's going to be right about there, and then it's going to be locked in. I'm going to have a flat horizontal line that's locked in right there. And you keep doing this over and over and over again until you've paid off your loan in 30 years. Again, I said it out loud, but I didn't write it down. You don't need to write this down, but I'll write it down up here. This is still usually 30 years for your adjustable mortgages. I blanked there on the term. And again, this now happens over and over and over again. You can think, okay, so this next year, it's about the same spot, maybe a little bit lower. So this next point down here in red, it's going to be basically at the same spot and then comes out to the right. You look again, okay, that year it went up a little bit. So this one comes up a little bit, comes out to the right. And then you look at the next spot and you keep doing this pattern over and over and over again. So go ahead and do a few of these intervals to prove to me that you know what you're doing. And there is a graph of a 30-year fixed rate versus a 5-1 arm. Does that look fun?
Looks kind of bad, but.
No, yeah, that's fair. When it comes down here, so again, it should only be 1% higher. So if this is the point, 1% higher should be right up there. You always just want to be adding 1% to whatever the treasure monitor is. The distance should always be the same. And again, so notice how these distances are changing here. See if that distance, these distances should always be the same. So this distance right here is really tiny, and that distance right here is too big. They should always be the same distance. You don't have to fix it, I just want you to understand the logic. So all of these intervals that it moves over to the right should be exactly 1 minute. So someone looks like tiny, it should all be the same interval. But you're doing a good job trying to cut the height of the graph. So yeah. Yeah, excellent. So what is the power of interest rate? You see a bunch of lines here like, okay, that's 4.1, that's 3.1. Like, what does any of this mean? So this next category, we're actually using our calculators as promised. This is going to be titled the power of interest rate. So I'm going to create a scenario that all of you are going to use your calculators for. Here's your scenario. Your listing price for this house is going to be something simple, 100,000. Yes, it is a very cheap house. Your down payment is just enough to avoid mortgage insurance, 20%. And you have two different options. I want you to calculate two different things. And some of these are not built into your spreadsheet yet. You could probably program it on your own, or you could just, I think you're going to have to program it. I want to know the total amount of interest paid with two different interest rates. So I have interest rates, and there's two of them. So I'm going to do it right in the center here. Interest rates. The first interest rate is, let's make it the current one. If Mr. Sindel locked in right now, I'd have 3.062. 3.062%. And let's look at Mr. Sindel's 4%. I want to ask a question that you should be able to answer by the end of class. Once you have this question answered, you are done with your notes. I'll also define, we're going to be doing 30-year fixed, which means those of you that have only 15 years are going to have to expand your formula out to 360 months instead of 180 months. The question is this. I'm kind of running out of room here. I want you to look at the total interest paid. And what I mean by that is if I look at my mortgage calculator, not there, but over here. If I look at my mortgage calculator and I add up just interest, again, this is money that the bank or lending institution is making off of you. If I add up all of these numbers, what is that total amount of one case where I have this 3.062 versus this other case of 4%. Is it a little bit? Is it a lot? This is less than 1%. I've only gone up by 0.938%. It's less than 1%. Is that a big amount of money or is it a little amount of money? That's kind of the general idea. What is the total interest paid for those two cases? And I'll come around and help you guys. I think that's all that we need. Let me check. Dun, 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 dun. Yep. All right. Good luck. No, I gave you the interest rate. I want to know what is the total interest paid for the 3.062% and what is the total interest paid for the 4%. Those are the two different cases.